pulse of him.
I wasn't looking for a story. I was looking for a cheap room, a door that locked, and a place where no one asked questions. The ad was painfully normal. Spare room. Quiet apartment. No guests. Month to month, the last part stood out, but not enough to scare me off. Rent in the city had gone feral, and my savings were already bleeding out. So when Owen replied within 10 minutes and didn't ask for references, I took it as a win. The building was older than it looked online. Brick exterior, narrow hallway, the smell of dust and something vaguely citrus. Owen opened the door after my second knock, like he'd been standing there waiting but didn't want to seem eager. "Lucas?" he asked. "Yeah." He stepped aside immediately. No handshake. No small talk. Just space. The apartment was clean in a careful way, nothing personal on the walls, furniture placed like it had been measured twice. He showed me the room, the bathroom, the kitchen rules. All practical. All controlled. "No guests," he said again, softer this time, eyes flicking away. "Ever?" I nodded. I didn't need guests. I needed silence. The first few days were uneventful. Almost too quiet. Owen kept to himself, leaving early, coming back late, always headphones on, always retreating to his room like the rest of the apartment didn't exist. He washed his mug immediately after using it. Lined his shoes perfectly by the door. Never cooked when I was in the kitchen. At first, I thought he just didn't like people. Then I noticed the patterns. He'd freeze if voices drifted up from the street. Mute the TV the second laughter came through the wall. Once, when a neighbor knocked on the wrong door, Owen didn't answer, just stood still in the hallway, holding his breath like a kid hiding during a game. That night, I heard him pacing until nearly 3 in the morning. A week in, I came home early. Earlier than usual. I heard him before I saw him, bare feet on tile, a sharp inhale, something clattering to the floor. "Owen?" I called. Silence. Then, "Yeah." He was crouched near the counter, picking up shards of a broken glass with shaking fingers. His face went pale when he realized I was standing there. "I didn't know you'd be back," he said quickly. "It's fine," I said, kneeling. "I'll help." He hesitated like my presence physically hurt, then nodded once. We cleaned in silence, hands careful not to touch. His knuckles were red. His breathing never fully slowed. When we were done, he stood too fast. "Sorry. I should have dash. You don't have to apologize," I said. He looked at me then. Really looked. Like he was deciding whether I was safe. That night, lying in my new bed, I realized something unsettling. Owen wasn't rude. He wasn't cold. He was afraid. Not of me. Not exactly. But of being seen fully, clearly, without walls or rules or exits. And the strange part was, instead of pushing me away, that fear pulled at something in me. A quiet curiosity. A patience I didn't know I had. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the apartment settle, and wondered what kind of life teaches someone to disappear inside their own home. Whatever it was, I had a feeling I hadn't just rented a room. I'd stepped into something much quieter. Much closer. Living with Owen became an exercise in noticing what wasn't said. We passed each other like ghosts most mornings, quiet nods, careful distance. But the longer I stayed, the more the silences stretched, softened. He started leaving his mug in the sink instead of washing it immediately. Once, I caught him humming under his breath while making coffee, until he realized I was there and stopped like he'd been caught stealing. The rule about guests stayed firm. A friend texted me one night, asking if he could crash for an hour. I declined without asking Owen, and when I mentioned it offhand later, his shoulders dropped in visible relief. "Thanks," he said. Just that. But it lingered. The first real crack came on a rainy Thursday. The power flickered, then went out completely, plunging the apartment into a dim, blue-gray quiet. I heard Owen's door open slowly, like he was testing the air. "Hey," I said from the couch. "You okay?" He hovered in the hallway, hands clenched at his sides. Yeah. Do you mind if we leave the lights off when they come back? I paused. Sure. Why? He hesitated, then shrugged in a way that wasn't convincing. Feels safer. So we sat there in the dark, the rain tapping against the windows, the city reduced to distant noise. It should have been awkward. Instead, it felt strangely intimate, like sharing a secret without naming it. After a while, he spoke again. You're not what I expected. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Good or bad? Different, he said. Then, quieter. Most people push. I didn't ask what he meant. I just let the silence hold us. Days later, I came home to find him in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables with more focus than necessary. He startled when he saw me, then relaxed when I didn't say anything. Want some? He asked suddenly, gesturing at the pan. I made too much. It felt like an invitation bigger than dinner. We ate at opposite ends of the table, conversations slow and careful, like learning a new language together. He told me about his job, his love of early mornings, his hatred of crowded trains. Nothing heavy. Nothing sharp. But when I thanked him and stood to clear my plate, he said, You can stay. If you want. So I did. That night, lying in bed, I realized the apartment no longer felt like borrowed space. It felt shared. Not because walls had moved, but because something inside Owen had shifted just enough to let me exist beside him. I didn't know how far that opening went. I only knew I didn't want to rush it. Some things, I was learning, needed time to feel safe. It wasn't sudden. That's the thing people always expect: the moment, the spark, the obvious turn. What happened with Owen was quieter than that. It crept in through routines. We started sharing mornings without planning to. I'd wake up earlier than necessary just to sit at the table while he made coffee. He'd slide an extra mug across without looking at me, like it had always been meant for me. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. The silence stopped feeling like something to tiptoe around. I learned his tells. The way his jaw tightened when he was overwhelmed. How he folded his arms when someone laughed too loudly outside. How he relaxed when I stayed seated instead of moving toward him. He learned mine too. That I needed noise to think. That I paced when I was anxious. That I always read the same paragraph twice before sleeping. One evening, I came home to find the apartment different. Not messy. Just lived in. A jacket draped over the chair. Music playing low from Owen's room, the door half open. I paused in the hallway, unsure if I was allowed to notice. You can come in, he said, not turning around. His room was sparse but warmer than the rest of the apartment. Books stacked on the floor. A lamp instead of overhead light. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees. I had a bad day, he said. I didn't ask what happened. I just nodded. Want company or quiet? He thought about it. Then patted the space beside him. Company. Quiet company. So I sat. Not touching. Just close enough to feel the heat of him. We stayed that way for a long time, breathing in sync without meaning to. At one point his hand drifted closer, stopped, then rested on the mattress between us. He didn't pull it away. Later, he surprised me by speaking. People think I'm aloof, he said. Or picky. Or rude. I waited. I just don't like being watched, he continued. Not really. It feels like pressure. Like if someone looks too closely, they'll want something I don't know how to give. My chest tightened. You don't owe anyone anything. He nodded, but his eyes stayed on the floor. You don't look at me like that. Like what? Like you're deciding. That landed heavier than he probably meant it to. I didn't touch him. I wanted to. But this wasn't about reaching. It was about staying. When I left his room, the apartment felt different again. Smaller. Softer. Like the walls had leaned in just enough to listen. That night, I lay awake thinking about how intimacy doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits beside you, waits to see if you'll stay. and I had a feeling Owen was starting to believe that I would. It took another week before anything changed outwardly. Inwardly, though, something had already shifted. Owen stopped retreating the second he heard me come home. Sometimes he stayed in the kitchen while I put my bag down. Sometimes he asked how my day was and actually waited for the answer. Once, when I laughed a little too loud at something on my phone, he flinched, then caught himself, exhaled, and didn't leave the room. That felt bigger than it should have. I started realizing how much effort it cost him to stay. One evening, he asked if I could let him know ahead of time if I planned to be home late. Not because he wanted to track me, but because unpredictability rattled him. I agreed without hesitation, and the relief on his face was almost painful to witness. The closest we came to touching happened by accident. I was reaching for a plate in the cabinet when he stepped in at the same time, misjudging the space. His arm brushed my bare skin, warm, and he froze instantly, like a startled animal. I pulled back automatically, heart pounding, already apologizing. "It's okay," he said quickly. Too quickly. But he didn't move away. We stood there, arms inches apart, breathing carefully. I could feel the tension radiating off him, not fear exactly, but restraint. Choice. "I'm not mad," he added softer. "Just adjusting." I nodded. "Me too." That night, I noticed he didn't close his bedroom door all the way. The next turning point came with a knock. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour where the sun feels tired. Someone rapped sharply on the door twice. Owen stiffened instantly, eyes darting like he was searching for exits that didn't exist. "I've got it," I said, already standing. He hesitated, then nodded. "Please." It was the neighbor from downstairs. Wrong package. 10 seconds tops. But when I closed the door and turned around, Owen was sitting on the floor against the wall, knees drawn up, breathing shallowly. I sat a few feet away. Didn't touch him. Didn't speak. After a while, he looked up. "I hate that you saw that." "I'm glad I did," I said gently. "It means you didn't have to be alone with it." His throat bobbed. He looked away again. Later that night, he knocked on my door for the first time. "Can I come in?" he asked. I said yes without thinking. He sat on the chair by the window, hands clasped, posture tight. "I don't invite people over," he said. "Not because I don't like them, but because once they're here, they expect access to my time, my body, my reactions." I listened. "You don't," he continued. "You let me decide." Something warm and heavy settled in my chest. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. Not as a promise. As a fact. He nodded slowly, like he was testing the weight of that idea. When he left, he paused at the door. "Thank you," he said. After he was gone, I sat on my bed for a long time, realizing how closeness isn't about how near someone gets but how safe they feel staying. And somehow, quietly, we were building that. After that night, Owen started knocking before entering any shared space. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The difference mattered. We fell into something that almost looked like normal. Grocery lists on the fridge. A shared joke about the broken hallway light. Evenings where we sat on opposite ends of the couch, both pretending we weren't aware of how intentional the distance was. How chosen. One night, he asked if we could watch something together. Not a movie. Something quiet. A nature documentary, volume low, lights dimmed. He sat stiff at first, hands folded, like he was bracing for impact. Halfway through, I shifted. Not toward him, just enough to get comfortable. He noticed anyway. His breathing changed. Then, after a long pause, he leaned back too. Our shoulders didn't touch, but the gap narrowed. Either of us spoke. The first time he touched me, it was barely a thing. We were both reaching for the remote. Our fingers collided, soft, brief. I froze out of instinct, ready to retreat. But Owen didn't pull away. His fingers lingered, tentative, like he was waiting for permission he wasn't sure how to ask for. I stayed still. That was all it took. He exhaled. shaky and quiet, and let his hand rest there for a heartbeat longer before pulling back. He looked at me, searching. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "You?" He nodded. "Once." "Yeah." But his ears were pink, and his hands trembled when he folded them into his lap. Later that week, something unexpected happened. He laughed. Really laughed. It caught both of us off guard. I'd made a stupid comment about the landlord's email, something dry and sarcastic. The sound that came out of him was warm and unguarded, like it hadn't been used in a while. He clapped a hand over his mouth immediately, eyes wide, like he'd broken something. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "For what?" I asked. "For being loud." I shook my head. "You're allowed to take up space." He stared at me like I'd said something radical. Dangerous. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized how careful he was with every inch of himself, volume, movement, emotion. How long he must have lived believing that being noticed meant being demanded from. And slowly, impossibly, he was testing a different idea. That closeness didn't have to cost him safety. That someone could see him without reaching in and taking. The apartment felt quieter than ever, but not empty. Not tense. Just held. And as sleep finally came, I understood something clearly for the first time. Whatever this was becoming, it wasn't fragile because it was slow. It was strong because it was. The shift became noticeable to other people before it fully registered with me. My sister called one evening, loud and affectionate as always. I took the call in my room, door closed, but when I stepped back into the kitchen afterward, Owen looked up from the sink. "That was a lot of energy," he said, carefully neutral. "I can take calls outside if you want," I offered immediately. He shook his head. "No. I just dash." He paused, choosing his words like fragile glass. "I'm glad it was you. I don't think I could handle someone else's voice in here yet." The word "yet" stayed with me long after he went back to washing dishes. A few nights later, I woke up to movement. Not noise movement. Subtle, careful. Owen stood in the hallway, barefoot, like he wasn't sure where he was going. "You okay?" I asked quietly. He startled, then relaxed when he saw it was me. "I had a dream," he said. "Nothing dramatic. Just noise. Too many people." "Do you want to sit?" I asked, already moving to the couch. He nodded. We sat side by side, closer than before but still not touching. The city hummed faintly through the windows. His breathing slowed gradually, syncing with mine the way it had that night on his bed weeks ago. After a while, his pinky brushed mine. This time, neither of us moved away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to do this part." "Which part?" I asked. "Letting someone stay," he said. "Even when my instincts say to disappear." I turned slightly, not enough to crowd him. "You don't have to do it all at once." He nodded, eyes fixed on our hands. "I think I trust you with the waiting." That felt like more than a confession. It felt like an offering. We sat there until the sky began to lighten, hands resting side by side, not holding, just present. When he finally stood, he hesitated, then squeezed my fingers once before letting go. It wasn't romantic in the way stories like to make things romantic. There was no rush, no heat, no sudden clarity. But when I went back to bed, the apartment felt undeniably different. Not quieter. Not louder. Safer. And as sleep took me again, I knew we were past the point of pretending this was just a rental. We were choosing each other slowly, deliberately, and without asking for more than either of us was ready to give. After that night, nothing happened, and somehow, that meant everything had. Owen didn't avoid me anymore. Not fully. He still needed space, still flinched at sudden noise, but there was a new steadiness underneath it. Like he wasn't bracing for loss every second. Like he'd accepted that I existed in the apartment not as a variable, but as a constant. One morning, I woke to the smell of toast. Actual toast. Burned slightly, because of course it was. I padded into the kitchen and found Owen standing there in socks, staring down at the toaster like it had betrayed him. I forgot it did that, he said flatly. I smiled. It's dramatic. You get used to it. He glanced at me, then surprised me by smiling back. Small. Real. He pushed a plate toward me without a word. 2 pieces. Unevenly buttered. Intentionally shared. We ate standing up, shoulders almost touching. The first time he initiated closeness, I almost missed it. We were sitting on the couch again, our default place now, and a group of people laughed loudly outside. Owen stiffened, eyes darting. Instinctively, I shifted closer, not touching, just their dash. Instead of pulling away, he leaned in. Just enough for his arm to rest against mine. It wasn't dramatic. No sparks. No rush. Just wait. Trust. A quiet decision made in real time. He stayed like that for the rest of the night. Later, when I stood to go to bed, he caught my wrist gently. Not gripping. Just anchoring. Stay? He asked. Not in my room. Not in his. Just present. So I sat back down. That was the night he told me the truth, not all of it, but enough. He talked about a past that taught him being wanted was dangerous. That attention came with expectations he couldn't meet. That affection always felt like the start of a countdown. I learned how to disappear, he said quietly. It was easier than explaining why I couldn't be what people wanted. I didn't interrupt. I didn't fix it. I just listened. When he finally stopped talking, the silence didn't feel heavy. It felt complete. You don't disappear, I said after a while. You pause. There's a difference. He looked at me like he was trying to memorize my face. That night, when I went to bed, he didn't retreat behind his door. He left it open. Not wide, just enough for light to pass through. Lying there, listening to the apartment breathe, I understood something clearly. This wasn't a story about saving someone, or fixing them, or proving anything. It was about 2 people choosing slowness, choosing presence, choosing to let closeness be quiet instead of consuming. And for the first time since I moved in, the apartment didn't feel like a place we were hiding in. It felt like a place we were staying. The realization didn't arrive with fanfare. It showed up on a Tuesday. Nothing special about it. Gray morning. Dishes drying on the rack. Owen sitting at the table, reading something on his phone, glasses slipping down his nose. He looked up when I entered, and instead of that familiar micro pause checking himself, checking me, he just said, "Morning," like it was the easiest thing in the world. I poured coffee. Sat down across from him. A few minutes passed before I noticed it, his foot, stretched out under the table, lightly resting against mine. Not testing. Not tentative. Just there. He noticed me noticing and didn't pull away. That evening, I almost ruined it by overthinking. We were in the living room, lights low, rain tracing lines down the window. He was quieter than usual, gaze unfocused. The old version of me, the one trained to fill silences, almost spoke. Instead, I stayed. After a while, he shifted closer, shoulder pressing into mine, his head tilting just enough to rest against my arm. The contact was warm, grounding. I could feel his breath slow. "I think," he said softly, "this is the first place I've lived where I don't feel like I'm being measured." "For what?" I asked. "For how much I give back," he said. "How much I perform." I swallowed. "You don't have to earn being here." He nodded, eyes closed, absorbing it. Then, carefully, like it was the most deliberate choice he'd made in years, he turned his head and kissed my shoulder. Not my mouth. Not even my cheek. Just a quiet, grounding touch that said more than anything louder ever could. I didn't move. I didn't rush. Neither did he. Later, as we got ready for bed, he lingered in the hallway. "I don't know what this is supposed to look like," he admitted. "Us. It doesn't have to look like anything," I said. "It just has to feel right." He considered that. Then smiled soft, unguarded, real. "Then," he said, "this feels right." That night, We didn't sleep together. Not in that way. He stayed in his room. I stayed in mine. Doors open. Light spilling across the floor between us, like a quiet agreement. Lying there, I understood the truth behind everything that had unfolded. Love didn't arrive as a grand gesture. It arrived as consent, as patience, as the freedom to stay without being consumed. I rented a room from a stranger. What I found was someone learning slowly, bravely how to be seen. And somehow, in the quiet of that shared space, I learned the same.